As a content warning to today's episode, a few topics come up. We discuss incarceration of adults and children, injustice in the carceral system, illness and loss of a loved one, and experiencing grief. Welcome to Able Pathways Podcast. I'm Annabelle Ferber, founder of Able Pathways, where we provide executive function coaching for neurodiverse individuals and professional development for educators. Our podcast explores the windy journeys of learning and growth. Each episode, we travel the unique pathways taken by a diverse range of interesting people as they reflect on pivotal moments in their lives that led to unexpected insights and transformation. Through these conversations, we hope to illuminate the infinite pathways for how we grow and learn. Visit our show notes for links, information about our speakers, and resources mentioned on this episode. Today, we're exploring how Gunjan Koul, she, her, came into her work as a therapeutic horticulturalist, founding Seed and Bloom, which works to empower incarcerated individuals at any stage of their journey by offering recreational solutions for reentry into the realms of the garden and the kitchen. We'll trace the path that led to this work and explore what's next for the future. I'm delighted to be joined by Gunjan Koul, founder and director of the project, who will share their incredible journey in plants and carceral spaces. Let's begin. All right. So, Gunjan, what are you currently reading, watching, or listening to? What's captured your attention lately?
Well, I have been binge watching a new show that just came out on Netflix. It's called The Beast in Me with Claire Danes and Matthew Rhys. I don't know
Oh,
if you've heard of this. Yeah, I
no.
needed a good thriller. And I'm reading a book called Mother Mary Comes to Me by Arundhati Roy, which is a book about her wild and tough mom and her upbringing. So,
Oh, cool.
yeah, that's on the reading side. And I guess I should also offer that TV is something that is so regulating for me. So I often will live in the worlds of The West Wing and of The Bear and
Yeah.
of the show called Shrinking. I think those three are probably ones I watch weekly. Just
Yeah.
like leave an episode on and speak with those characters. So yeah, that's my diet of TV at the minute. Yeah.
Awesome. I remember reading The God of Small Things.
Yeah, yeah.
The year it came out, it still remains one of my favorite books I've ever read. Just
Oh,
extraordinary emotional depth.
yeah. And she's got one of those voices that you just feel like you are talking to a longtime friend. I feel like she's just catching me up on her mom, who we haven't talked about before when I'm reading this. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh
So
my goodness. Wonderful. So I'm curious if there's a small joy or just a simple pleasure that you've been appreciating recently in your life.
I've been taking more time with the leaves, I think, this fall season than in years past. And I think part of that is bringing an activity with like a basket of leaves into the classroom where I teach. And we did an exercise. What do the leaves teach us? And I've been thinking a lot about that, watching them fall like snow in my courtyard. What am I saying goodbye to? And what am I making room for? And how am I putting down, you know, things that in that effort will actually nourish me? So I think that simple practice is actually making this season a little more, it's just softer. Usually around this time in the year, I think I run into this wall of like, oh my God, it's what have I even done this year? And already we're going to be in a new one. And I'm running out of time almost. And it's like if I can slow down a little bit and pay attention to the leaves, I think that's a recent practice that's really been grounding. So simple, but also really, really comforting. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that the way you phrase, like, making room. What do we no longer need to carry? 'Cause it's such a hopeful, almost spring more I think of that season more looking
Mm.
forward, but bringing it into the fall is a beautiful idea. Thank you for sharing that. I'm so excited to chat with you today. I know you've lived a really incredible life and you're doing incredible things now, and I just want to tuck into all of it. So, let me ask you if there's a story that you could share just how you got interested in therapeutic horticulture. Where did this all start for you?
Mm. I think that the seed of this journey started through grief. And I think, my dad was ill for a very long time. He had um, a kidney disease, chronic kidney disease, and finally, when he died, I was in a real deep depression, and I'd been a nurse, and so really um, appreciated having a clinical set of tools. I'm convinced that I went to nursing school and was a nurse simply to handle my dad's death, simply to
Wow.
put a distance between what was happening emotionally and really understanding it through the lens of science. And then when that fell away and when he died, I think that depression left me really unsure of how I wanted to practice healing, which I very much wanted to do. It was becoming clear that at that point I was 32 and I'm 41 now. Um, but it was clear that I wanted to keep going in this healing journey. And so um, a friend signed me up for a moss terrarium building class in Brooklyn where I was living at the time. And I was really reluctant to go and feeling just, like, what is the point? And and all of a sudden in that class, they bring out different types of moss and hearing about the resiliency of this plant and how it feasts on rocks for centuries. And here it is growing out of the sidewalk. Here it is, coming to life from things that have died. And it really shifted something in my brain. And so then the seed, right? I thought like this should be a thing. Therapeutic horticulture. How do we use plants with people? Because that's the way. It's working for me. It's got to work for others. And that started this journey into taking classes at the New York Botanical Garden in therapeutic horticulture and ultimately doing a certificate in horticultural therapy and you know, and committing to a project, you have to do a certain amount of practical hours in a space. And so in New York, there are several programs at the bedside with patients in the hospital systems in NYU Langone Hospital of working with plants at the bedside with patients and charting on a professional level alongside occupational therapists and speech therapists. And then coming to the project, the New York Botanical Garden had a relationship with Rikers Island Greenhouse Garden. It's the program at the jail there on Rikers Island. And that's really where I fell in love with a thing. It was like the perfect point at which all of these life experiences and educational experiences just got to come together. So,
Mm.
yeah, yeah, that was the start
Oh,
of it. Mhm.
that was the start. I love that. I'm always curious about the detours that I don't use that word in a pejorative sense. I just mean, things
Mm,
that were unexpected that showed up in your life on this journey to becoming a therapeutic horticulturalist. What would you
mhm.
say, can you point to any unexpected detours in that journey that you feel was really enriching to the work you do now?
Well, that's an interesting one. I think that there were many, um, so like the work in therapeutic horticulture really found its legs. I worked for 5 years. So I did my hours at the Rikers Island greenhouse and the jail there. And then I was given an opportunity by one of my teachers at the New York Botanical Garden to go work for a company based out of Harlem. And they're called Sprout by Design. And so all of our work was in youth detention centers in the five boroughs and in Westchester, New York. And immediately I was really afraid to go in. I thought, what a scary age group, teenagers in youth detention. What am I gonna, I don't have children and I hadn't spent a lot of time in particular with that age group, particularly in this way. And I remember that in the beginning, a wonderful mentor, my boss at Sprout by Design, Ilona, she we stopped by a Petco to pick up crickets to take into one of our detention centers. And these detention centers look like just any old brownstone in Brooklyn. You wouldn't realize that inside there were children in there wearing like a uniform of gray sweats, socks, and sandals, going to school in those clothes, living days of their lives in that environment. And so, anyway, Ilona, she got these crickets and we pulled up chairs next to this one young man, one of my first students in detention, and we just looked at the crickets. What were they doing in there? And what a strange mirror to hold up with this child who was also in such a controlled, locked space and not in an environment that felt natural at all. But I realized that one of the reasons I felt so comfortable pulling a chair up, Ilana didn't ask me to. It was like one of my first days, and I just was like, okay, well, I guess I'll just pull up this chair and sit with Ilona and sit with this young man. And why was it so comfortable and almost like familiar? Well, I think because of my childhood. I think, when I really reflect, my mom is such a brilliant and complex person. And also a person who's had a lot of pain in her life. And then when I was younger, my mom was extremely busy trying to work, a couple of different jobs to take care of me, but she needed me to be occupied. And our house was one of tension. So she'd be working and she'd say, I need you to just sit there and do this exercise. I need you to, tell the story of a chair. Look at the chair. Look at this screen chair. Like, where did this chair come from? And how does it feel that a bunch of people sit on it? And who are the hands, whose hands made this chair? And give this object an entire world and personality. And I think in a space in my childhood where that felt really at times lonely and like confining, it was actually those exercises in hindsight that I realized sitting in this carceral space with children where I was like, okay, you have to work really hard to find ways to get your mind free. How do you free your mind when you
Wow.
actually physically can't?
That's extraordinary because it sounds like maybe not unexpected, but something that, well, the unexpectedness is how your childhood, how you were raised, and how your mother cultivated like a inner freedom
Mm.
um, that helped you recognize that maybe in others and work to help them cultivate that skill as well. Is
I
that
think
the
that's
the
right.
connection?
Yeah.
I am curious though about these crickets. You brought the crickets in to like that's the chair in your example, like something, some kind of sensory input and
Hmm.
something for these children to respond to and interact with that wasn't just the therapists in the room or the
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. The facilitator. Yeah. Like
yeah,
this young man picked up it was like a little, like a plastic case terrarium, it's just like this
yeah,
little size of a box, really, just a small box. And there must have been six crickets inside crawling all over each other. And this young man's first impulse was to shake the box and make the crickets, startle them or shake up their world. But he was in control.
right.
And
That's
I,
yeah,
and I think Ilona also gave me this context, right, where a lot of our students in New York who, I mean, hours of conversation, right? But school to prison pipeline,
Yeah.
um, found themselves through a series of behavioral, like patterns and write-ups and punitive
Yeah.
measures by the system, right? To end up in these spaces. These are also students who've grown up in like the projects, who've grown up in places where when you see a bug in, say, a smaller space in your living space, you crush it, you remove it, you clean your space. And so I think Ilona giving me that context too of like there could be a lot going on right now with this young person looking at these living creatures in this box
Yeah.
that he could control that spoke to parts of his own experience or how he views things, like bugs in the space. And so I don't know if I'm
Yeah.
articulating it quite right, but it's ultimately, though, I will say that after about 10 minutes, this young man simply put the box on the table and observed.
Oh,
So I think that was such a cool thing, and then it's hard to describe. It's even hard to access the memory completely of what his eyes looked like studying these things that were physically so much smaller and yet in a gesture of empathy, how he was looking at them too
yeah.
in
Yeah.
such a short amount of time, that shift.
Yeah. Wow. There's so much to unpack there, but I want to also ask you, we when we share stories about our lives and our careers, we tend to hit the highlights and we sort of create a narrative, but I'm really interested in those quieter and less visible parts of your journey.
Mm.
Um, are there any aspects of your own development in this field that don't typically make it into your bio, but you feel are, if they're a way to package them right, you would put them on your bio. You know they're important and they've made a big impact on
Mm,
your.
yeah, I think the thing I wouldn't put in my bio, but I feel constantly, is that I'm definitely no expert and I'm definitely never gonna be. And I hope that's not a reflection of like a ceiling on my curiosity. I think I mean to say that, going in for my first day in youth detention, we had an hour drive from Harlem where our Sprout by Design headquarters were to get to our first location where we would meet with students. And it was, yeah, like an hour north. And so spending a lot of time with Ilona in the car, and having her say to me, you're not meant to be the expert. Like you are going to know more you're going to know more about gardening. You're going to know more about plants, presumably, than others in the space, especially young people who've been city kids, like
Yeah.
you can trust that a little bit. And I think what stuck with me, and when I bring facilitators into the space where we teach now, which is at the Penitentiary of New Mexico, I am often mystified by the amount of knowledge. I mean, some of our facilitators are, farmers and they're weavers and they have a close relationship with like plants and textiles. And I'm in awe because I think, wow, you've really mastered something, like honed a craft in this like larger umbrella of plants and horticulture. And I think what I wouldn't put in my bio is that's never going to be me. I'm always going to be most interested in making people feel at home with plants. So,
Yeah.
why do you like the texture and how do you relate yourself, to this life cycle of a plant that's in front of you? And
Yeah.
how do we just in its most simple effort just appreciate that we're holding this thing or observing this thing that is incredibly alive, that we have a lot to learn from, and
Yeah.
and if it's not as deep as that, then it's God, would you look at the colors of these flowers and would you look at the
Right.
texture of this moss?
Yeah.
And I think it is getting back to this sense, like how do you put that in a bio? Which is like, I want people to play with plants again. That's that's what I might be a master at, is just getting people to remember why it's
Yeah.
fun and it's soothing and it's restorative. Yeah.
Uh, it's such an ancient art that there's a
Mm.
connective tissue to all of our ancestors back to the very beginning, right?
Mhm.
I don't know if that's part of the healing, but I think about that. My favorite plants are like ferns
Totally. Yeah.
because they just, whenever I see a fern, I grew up around a lot of ferns, but I also, um, it brings imagination. I think about, dinosaurs had ferns too, you know? It's like not on your bio. I know nothing, but I also am really good at connecting people to plants. I love that. I don't think people would expect that, but I have had a similar experience. The more I grow in my own practice of teaching and learning, the the more assured I am that I know nothing. And then that makes me curious and open to learn more, but that only proves how little I knew before. So I understand
Totally
that
right.
completely.
Yes. Yes.
Um,
Absolutely.
Speaking of, are there sort of changes that through your own experience as a student and then becoming someone who's teaching others, has your understanding of learning and growth itself evolved throughout your journey?
Most definitely.
Yeah,
Most definitely. I think, well, you can really see in a learning space, certainly the differences in how people learn, which is beautiful that we all do it in these really different and effective for us ways. You can also see, I think, the fearlessness of people who haven't had access to a more formal education or experiences going to university.
yeah,
But there is more of like an eyes open, just taking larger bites out of the out of the learning experience, I think, than maybe people who've gone to school for longer and maybe
yeah,
forgotten how to just love learning, if that makes sense. It's just an
yeah,
observation that I see with my students who range in age from 24 to 58,
yeah,
adult men who are incarcerated. So, really getting a look at different opportunities that have been afforded, like, yeah, and in education for our students up until this point, and sort of a look at how the value in education and the excitement around it for some can be about finishing an HVAC program and getting a
yeah,
certificate that guarantees a certain amount of money on a paycheck can feel really exciting and can make the learning more, the desire to learn or the desire to complete that program, more like motivating, which is so different from how I was given opportunities to go to school and to learn and to take random classes in philosophy and write a class called Individual Freedom versus Authority. Like, just what? um, but how exciting that was. And also, you don't, everyone's got a different way of feeling excited about learning. And I think for some, that's going to be the journey. And for some, that's going to be the outcome. So maybe that's what I've learned more and
mm,
more too, in my time as a facilitator. I'm so reluctant to ever say teacher, because again, I don't feel really like I'm a master of anything. And it's equalizing, right? Like if I'm just I'm with you. Like we're all students
yeah.
here, you know.
I also was majoring philosophy in the beginning, and I remember coming across, again, I didn't know I was going to be a teacher. A teacher is someone who teaches stuff. So, but I understand that. I also love the word facilitator and instructor. But I think I think it was Socrates, but he wasn't the only one. It was like a thought of an ancient Greek time of um
Mm,
they were noodling on this idea of like what is a teacher, and a word that they used was what we would call a midwife.
mm, hmm,
Yeah, the idea that, your student is the person giving birth, right?
mm,
They're doing the labor and they're in the process of creating something in their learning. And the
mm.
midwife or the teacher is the person that is helping them to get through that labor and that pain of growth, but
I
not
love that.
but not at all responsible for what the individual is able to produce, right? Which is very different, I think, than some ways that we think about learning, which is you have a teacher who has knowledge and they pour it into the student's brain who receives it and processes it
Mhm,
perfectly as intended. I've never felt like that kind of teacher would be effective. I didn't
mm,
experience that as effective way of learning. So I understand. Yeah, anyway, thinking of yeah, this midwifery kind of role that
mm,
the facilitation of something as opposed to the holder of knowledge.
mm. I love that. Yeah,
Yeah, I
absolutely.
think about that a lot. Curious about relationships or communities you've been connecting with over the years that have been most formative to shaping the way that you approach this therapeutic work.
Yeah, I'd say that hanging out with farmers has
Yeah.
really transformed the way that I prioritize things in the world, or maybe better said, like where I assign, a degree of success or accomplishment. It's completely changed with farming and slowing way down through the seasons, being at the mercy of the elements. The learning space that we've tried to create and are building at the penitentiary, one of the arms of the project is our farm, and it's a production space for food and for flowers. It's a opportunity for freedom. It is a space where we're learning about integrated pest management and the health of our soil. And it's all of these things. And it's a way, I think more than anything, farming offers us, it's a way to play with time. So I think spending time with farmers, longtime farmers too, who've developed such an intimate relationship with land, with the elements, and with themselves. It's such a, I mean, it sounds so obvious, but it is such a humbling thing.
Yeah.
And the amount of like precision required or technical knowledge or, science knowledge. And I say it like that because, like, coming up, I think in childhood with two parents who have PhDs in the sciences, my dad being a chemist, my mom an entomologist, and me feeling very unsure of how to ever live up to that level of expertise in the sciences. And that it was so much for them. Their ticket out of India was, well, if you're going to set yourself apart from the other students, you're going to be really good at memorizing and you're going to be really good at taking tests because you've got to
Yeah.
be. That's your ticket out. And so that wasn't me. That wasn't my situation. It's not my brain. And somehow with farming, I thought this about nursing originally, which was okay, maybe this is the degree to which I can be involved in the sciences. And maybe this is my way. It's a caring profession. And it's also one in which I'm going to learn how to put like a nasogastric tube in a human body. And
Yeah.
then time passes and I realize, no, I think that really was given to me to survive my dad's illness and death. And then I think farming has just been this incredible gift and the company of farmers to say, this is this is a little bit of everything. This is magic. This is
Yeah.
science. This is a teaching space or a
Yeah.
facilitating space. It gets to be everything. Yeah.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I think there was something that you mentioned about time as well.
Mm.
want to expound on that at all, or should I move on to
Yeah.
the next question? Because I'm really curious to hear your view of how time plays a role in the
Yeah.
world of horticulture.
Yeah, with farming, right? So much of it is like in looking at so many variables go into this cultivation space. And so we're looking at in our greenhouses right now, okay, if you figure by March inside the greenhouses, you're looking at a high of about 108 degrees. And so we're going to put twice the amount of radishes and turnips that we put in the ground in April of this year. We're going to move that up a month and we're going to plan for there to be a 30% loss in the seeds that we're putting into the ground. And anyway, I guess more broadly speaking, especially in the carceral space, there are so few opportunities given to where you are getting ahead of the clock and
Yeah.
you are not just letting the clock happen to you. You're not serving out your sentence in those moments. You are organizing around larger ideas, this
Yeah.
team effort, and this land. And it's also kind of quiet, like in these quiet moments too, looking at our soil health. We recently had our second soil test. And so digging in just one shovel's worth and looking at our dirt and seeing all of these worms where there hadn't been before. It's like,
Oh, cool. Yeah.
another way we've played with time, and another way we're slowly bringing beings into this space who are playing with time too and who are part of this collaborative. I just think, particularly in this space, there's just so few opportunities to do that. And farming really is, well, it gets to be a whole nother planet out there.
Where walls or no walls, that time marches on.
Mm, yeah, for
So
sure.
much to this concept of time that's really fascinating, and I would imagine your students, do you call them your students?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So you can definitely call yourself a teacher, Gunjan.
Ah,
Yeah, I'm thinking your students, it must be not just a mental space for freedom, but there's this freedom too with the way that these plants, whether they're inside those walls or outside of them, are marching to their own drum, and you're trying to tune into that and plan for it,
mm.
and you do have some control. I mean, look, you've got worms in your soil, which I don't have any worms in my soil up here, so clearly I need to work on. Let's shift into talking a bit about pivotal moments. I'm curious if there's a professional or personal experience that transformed your understanding of therapeutic work, therapeutic horticulture.
Yeah, I think that so at the Penitentiary of New Mexico in 2020 for a year worked on a different project, and it was designed to be a project for the Institute for Applied Ecology, where we were growing a bunch of milkweed that would be outplanted as part of like a monarch
I was
highway.
going to say for butterflies.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, and I had a student who was in that program with me. And when we used all of the funding for that project, and I hadn't yet created my own, this was like February of last year of 2024.
So this was right before you founded Seed and Bloom.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
I thought, there was this middle space. There was this middle period before I called my friend Beth and was like, how do I make this a thing? How do I make a therapeutic horticulture project in carceral spaces, with my own stamp on it, sort of through all of these cumulative experiences in New York, in New Mexico? And how do I create something that really feels like my own in this space? And I think the courage to do it actually came from a student who's been with me since that program. So our farm leader is a student, even though Seed and Bloom, my project is, say, a year and a half old. I've actually been in the classroom with him for 2.5 years, and it is both a personal and professional pivot in that I learned this was something that my friend Paul, who works in the space with us, also is a facilitator with Seed and Bloom. He was actually giving me back an idea. So I loaned him this book from a basketball coach. It was the Duke men's basketball coach. And this guy, Coach K, wrote a book called Leading with the Heart. Paul gave me some of that message from Coach K back to me one day in the car. And he said,
I love that.
it's really cool. I kind of like sports metaphors. They sort of take the pressure off
Yeah.
of what can feel really overwhelming. And he's like, it's way more important that people buy in, that your team buys in to the idea of what you want to do than it is that you get the win. It's way more important that your team feels like a team. And I think this one student in particular, it was like he is my right hand and we are on different planets. He's on the planet that is, behind bars, totally locked down, not free. And I am here talking to you in the free world. And when we meet in this shared space, we both have this incredible amount of buy-in and that is trickling down to the rest of the team. We've had so many people join us and then get released and our farmers all have different out dates. But it was realizing that, through this work and through these relationships, like I I am getting the chance to develop personally and professionally with one of my students in a very powerful and unexpected way.
Yeah.
I am not the teacher in that space. Like we are teaching and learning from each other, and he
Yeah.
is equally a facilitator and a teacher
Yeah.
to everyone that comes after him. So I'd
Oh,
say that, yeah.
that's really powerful. And I can definitely relate to feeling as though I learn as much, if not more.
Mhm.
Or maybe it's just the nature of co-facilitation or there's a in I think real transformative learning environments, there is that
Definitely.
fluidity as opposed to if it's just completely hierarchical, then both teacher and student miss out. One of the best ways to learn is to teach.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess one curiosity I have about your work is like, do you find that you can be surprised by like just how young someone can be and be that co-facilitator? Like, what is the earliest that you've seen that happen, I guess, from one of your students?
Oh, I don't think I've ever been surprised because
Mm,
I think from the first days of working with like preschool and elementary students, I was learning about the world from them, but I was also learning about myself from them.
mm,
Um, and so, yeah, I when I think it was around my early 20s when I'd first dropped out of college, and everyone was like, "What are you gonna do?" I was like, "What I want is a job where I just get to learn for the rest of my life." And
mm,
unbeknownst to me, I was basically beginning to get the picture that I should be a teacher, facilitator, midwife, because that would give me what I was looking for, which is,
yeah. Yep.
a constant state of learning. But there's so much about the world I don't understand, so I don't think I'm ever surprised. But I think surprising maybe was a little bit of, like, how much I came to understand. I always understood myself pretty well, but understand how my brain works, that
Mm,
I learned and am still learning from every person I work with. So,
mm.
and that's in a constant state of change. So it's not like, I'm gonna have an experience to be like, okay, check that box. We're done learning. Because that's the thing about learning. You learn something and you realize, oh, I didn't know this other thing, and now I need to learn about that. So it's not a path that has an ending.
Mhm.
And before we got on here, we were talking about that idea of stories
Mhm.
have a beginning, middle, and end, but learning doesn't.
Yes.
And
And
in fact, you're unaware until later where the beginning even was. And I know that, when we're mm, growing into ourselves and figuring out what we want to do, that there's a lot of uncertainty. And I'm curious about the way you navigated through the uncertainty of growing and learning and not having all the input.
well, I've fallen down a lot on the journey, and we all have. And I think there have been absolute moments of despair with that uncertainty. And I think what was really helpful for me, I can point to a time where I got a set of tools maybe that I've been yearning for a long time. And that came in the form of a book. It's called Designing Your Life. And it's written by these two guys. I think it's Dave Evans and Bill Burnett, and they run the design school at Stanford. And their idea being that, the iPhone that you hold in your hand, the Android, whatever, it's the result of several hundreds, thousands of failed prototypes.
Right.
And that's how you get to a more perfect design. And one of the coolest exercises that that book gave me, so it comes with like a workbook too. And I was really reluctant. I'd never done anything like this, like read a sort of, self-helpy book and thought that that would have, I never made space to let the simplest of words in sometimes. The book is ultimately about getting back to play and getting back to joy. But one of the exercises, and we did this as a group of us, it was like four of our friend group at the time sat down and with a whiteboard went through these exercises. So the good time journal is an exercise in which you look at your day and from 9 a.m. until 5 p.m. or whatever hours you tend to work, you pay attention to where you're most in your flow and most in your joy. And that could look like I'm really in my joy from 12 to 1 when I'm mentoring these people, or I'm really in my flow and enjoying this when I'm making time to learn new information about like whatever
Yeah.
it is, but to
Yeah.
to constantly revisit what your good time journal is showing you because it can be quite a lot. And I think
Yeah.
that has helped me with the uncertainty as we go into 2026, and it's actually a tool that now I've been sharing with the students I keep in touch with as they reenter, pass their time in the program and reenter the free world. I did the good time journal exercise with one of my former students, now my friend, sitting on the lawn at UNM's campus by the library. And we both took time. We're like, okay, let's just take 10 minutes to fill this out. Explained to the student what the good time journal is. And it was so wonderful to get to do that with again, you think about time and your relationship to it and the ways in which it can contribute to your self-worth, right? Like to have the
Hmm.
freedom to design a prototype when you haven't been given that freedom. He was incarcerated for 10 years. Maybe he was working on several prototypes of himself to survive the space, but now here the like canvas for this new design in the free world gets to look entirely different. So anyway, what's
Yeah.
helped me with the uncertainty, I think, is to think of it like that, which is that
Yeah.
um, we are, the next iPhone, and then for the one
Yeah.
after that. Yeah.
That's a beautiful way to think because it allows you give yourself the freedom to grow and change as well, and also to seek a particular kind of change you might want.
Mm,
But it is so empowering to be guided through kind of exercises that prompt the questions, and then you develop that inner habit or routine with asking those because it's such a sense of control, I can imagine, for your students, especially on when they get out. The freedom can be overwhelming, but this is something of like listening to your body that maybe gives some of that sense of control back.
Totally. Yeah, I think it's like this bridge to, I was going to say action originally, but I think it's more of a bridge to passion. It's like
Mm,
if you
mm,
go through the exercise of really paying attention, if you've got a note in your average day, so really look for a pattern in yourself, in your day of where you feel joy, it's pretty hard to look away from, I think, where you're like, okay, well, I'm just not going to ever pay attention to getting more of that or, look away from this idea that I hadn't really put to paper before, which is, oh, yeah, I really do love this thing. I really
yeah,
do love spending my time in this way. Uh,
yeah, yeah. I think we often overestimate how easy it is to answer the question of what do you love doing?
yeah.
And that it actually is a skill to figure out what you love doing that can be taught, guided, prompted.
Yeah. Like, I don't know about you, but oh my God, if you added up all of the hours that I've spent right out of college, so in 2005, going on to Craigslist, going on to idealist.org, looking for jobs, and just like pages and pages of jobs across industry that
Yeah,
sounded just like the other one. All of the labels of like, well, cool, you get to be a coordinator, and then you're a manager, and then you're a director, and then you've ascended. I think you've described it like this, Annabelle, maybe if it's education or the common like path of career, which is it's like a video game. You really are trying to figure out the rules and ascend and ascend and ascend, and you don't where is that bridge to slowing down and thinking like,
yeah,
well, actually, I want to do only a third of this job. I only want to do a third of that, but we skip to the salary and the benefits and
right.
the
And
just
it's
the show.
understandable, right? Because
Yeah, totally.
we need to eat and get a roof over our head. And like,
100%.
we've talked about this a little bit, but sometimes, or I'd say oftentimes, our most valuable insights come from some of the most challenging experiences. And is there a particular struggle you would want to share that revealed itself to be really instrumental to your development and your growth as a person and in your career?
I mean, I think it's very true for me that losing my dad was the hardest thing that's happened so
Yeah.
far. And
Yeah.
I think it was a bunch of things. It was the love that he'd extended really unconditionally and with such clarity that does differ from the way that my mom is able to parent. So it was saying goodbye to that. It was saying goodbye to someone who I really wanted to demonstrate that his sacrifice had meant something, like, look, I'm going to do this thing and I'm going to be called this thing. And that is why you worked so hard to sell your motorbike, to pay for your visa application as a young man in India, come here for me, for this new generation, and, I was saying goodbye to the person that cared so much about that investment. And also, in a way, I was then free from it. It shifted the way I could then look at myself, really holding myself accountable in a different way, and even could start listening to the voice that says, well, I guess that does sound really nice, but I don't really want to do that. I actually think I
Mm,
want to do this. And is, me dabbling in farming and then eventually creating this program what you've made those sacrifices for, Dad? I don't know. But I think the challenge of that and the grief from that, but then the almost like moss, the sort of aliveness that got to be born out of that challenge and that grief and that ending continues to be the most surprising, beautiful thing.
mm,
So, so yeah, it's probably
yeah.
that.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you sharing that story of just the impact, the challenge and the heartbreak, and then maybe also some of um, the way that that has shaped you and buoyed you and given you helped you on your path as well,
Mm.
directly, indirectly. Is there a belief or assumption that you once held pretty firmly, but working in carceral spaces or starting Seed and Bloom that really just reconsidered those beliefs or things that you feel like you've evolved from now?
Well, I think growing up in the environment that I did and I often come up against across um, like a lot of my relationships and a lot of my way in the world is through splitting. Splitting is easier. Black and white is easier. And from childhood, that can sound like all people from Kashmir are this way, and all people from Gujarat are this way. The matter of factness associated with those like stereotypes and
Yeah.
yeah, this like splitting. And I think that being in carceral spaces, like when I got to the New York Botanical Garden and heard about the Rikers Island program and then went there for the first time, I'd never really paid attention to ideas around abolition before that.
Yeah.
And I'd
Yeah.
never, thought of it differently, kind of like, with a lot of our institutions that hospitals are places where sick people get better and prisons are places where bad people, need to be to satisfy this grave wrongdoing, and they are places of rehabilitation. Some really can be. And I think what has shifted is my feeling around forgiveness, our larger collective journey, and certainly with abolition. That now being in prison spaces, tearing down these institutions is the dream, and I wouldn't have
Um,
realized that 9 years ago. Wouldn't have even thought about it because we keep these places so removed from our everyday. Just,
yeah.
yeah, it's so easy to not have to unless it comes to your doorstep to think about. And
Yeah.
I think that's what's really shifted. Ideas around forgiveness and freedom. Yeah,
But I think to your point about like we literally lock people away and then we don't visibly see them, we don't hear from them, they don't have a voice. Um,
hmm,
and it is easier to say, well, they must be there for a reason, and that's for the greater good of society. But as someone myself who knows very little, even just the few documentaries I've seen or articles I've read, it feels very clear that this is not keeping society safe. And I think this country, don't we incarcerate more people than like anywhere in the world?
we do.
Um,
Yeah, we absolutely
like
do.
we're number one
Yeah.
at that, and that
Yeah.
feels um, untenable, and it certainly feels unjust. And
Yeah.
I may want to ask you later how we can support a fairer, more just system. But that's a lot of pressure for you to answer. But it's so
I've got the answer right here. It's written down. I'm gonna read it to you. Just kidding.
yeah,
No,
please.
yeah.
Well, just thinking like you know,
Yeah.
I'm not directly involved, but like what can a regular person do
Mm, mm,
besides become more aware? Or maybe the answer is support organizations like Seed and Bloom who are doing
mm,
therapeutic work. And
hmm.
um, but I'll get back on track here because but it's just such a fascinating idea to me about like what does it look like
Yeah.
to abolish those systems, and how do we help people get on board with it?
And it's
Yeah.
so it's so hard, right? There's the physical design of the space, which involves metal bars and locks and gray and in the courtyard or in the garden space without the garden looks like a real moonscape. Just very disconnected from. anything alive.
And that's part of the punishment, right? That design?
Yeah, so the physical design is, and then I think in the quieter moments and what we're up against is last week I got a talking to from corrections leadership around no longer using the first names of my students when I address them, that I was only to call them by their last names because after all, at the end of the day, this is prison. And in that instruction, I was supposed to know what that two corrections, right? Is that written down somewhere? Is that in a code where we are upholding a feeling, not just from this hour to this hour, there will be rec time, or from this hour to this hour, we're going to eat breakfast in this facility, but rather there is a code around which we all agree that our language and that our treatment of the people housed in these spaces on taxpayer dollars need to feel completely outside of themselves and their identity, just their very name, just their very first name.
Well,
Because after, yeah. Hmm.
no, I was just gonna that, the names that slaves were given.
Hmm.
We know about this tactic. It's a way to reduce someone to barely or less than human.
Definitely. Yeah, absolutely. And so
Obviously,
much.
you broke the rule of treating these folks like human beings. Yeah.
Yeah, and all programs, there's a dog program, there's a like a fine dining culinary training program, and we were all coached in the same way around language. So talk
Yeah.
to our teams by the end of the year. We're no longer going to refer to the students by their first names. And we try and play with this in our culinary workshops. Everyone is called chef. So we've been trying to invent,
That's
can
I
we call
love that.
everybody chef? I know it's so lovely, and it does add to this energy that we are trying to create and the buy-in that we're trying to create with our team.
Yeah.
And so can we use that word? Can we say chef at the farm? Can we say chef alongside the hydroponics tower? Can we say chef in the courtyard when we're passing, our book of poems around to share under the tree?
A subversive, beautifully subversive way of getting around it, because that's a title of honor,
Mhm.
even if it is homogenous amongst, multiple people are sharing it. It's a elevation title. Wow,
Definitely.
love
Yeah.
that.
Mm.
I would love to ask you about internal resources or practices that help you when you're not
Mm.
totally sure of the next steps, but you're trying to figure it
Mm.
out.
Well, I think for me, what really helps is to like free write. I'm so reluctant to call it journaling, but to,
Mm.
to free write, to pay attention. And this happens a lot immediately following a class with students, particularly with our student groups at the maximum facility. So you think about time, you think about a group of students, one in particular who says, Miss G, it's what I'm called, Miss G, time is irrelevant to me and has currently served 30 years and will serve the rest of the days of his life in this facility, right? So it's a very hard thing to hold, and burnout is real. And so I think when I'm feeling really outside of my body, or everything is just really piling on, free writing gives me the space where I say, okay, no more than a page. Just sit down and just start. And I think that's been really helpful. And it's a recent practice, I'd say within the last 2 years to do that. And I think outside of that, long walks with zero like podcast or music, but just me and maybe my dog Cheerio on the walk.
Yeah.
um, and finally therapy. I really um talk therapy for me consistently over the last 8 years. And I think really getting whatever tool it is that helps you get to the insight. How do you get to those aha or oh, sort of points in the journey? Because those are the points at which then change can actually happen and something different is introduced. And
Yeah.
it's really hard to slow down and pay attention. You can start to think like every class session in a particular space, from week to week will feel a certain way or offer you the same feelings, the same dynamics. And truly, when you're paying attention, they're not. They're different all the time. Um, and so, yeah, I'd say that has really helped. Free writing, walking, and therapy. Yeah,
Yeah. That's a great trifecta.
and
Um,
eating chocolate. I guess I'd add a fourth.
totally.
Yeah.
Why would you be reticent to use the word journaling? Is there an association to it or?
So much pressure
Yeah.
associated with journaling. So much pressure about a prompt and
Oh,
and we use these in the classroom. We do offer, well, we call them, my friend, actually, one of our facilitators, Daniela, they refer to it as a writing squat. It
oh,
is
nice.
just a way to get us. And I will say the prompts for journaling or for written reflection in our classroom look something like: a man wakes up in a field of blooming flowers. How did he get there? So there's an openness and sort of a dreaminess to the prompt where we are already on a field trip together. All of
Yeah.
us are elsewhere. We are beyond the walls of this prison
Yeah.
space, and we are really wondering and then inventing a whole story, a whole world. And we have to, because then we're going to share about them. But, you know, um, I think that sort of journaling is really exciting to me, probably for the very same reason that I shared about before around the prompt with the chair and giving
I
life
was
to it.
just going to ask you, this sounds like
Yeah.
the exercises that your mom taught you.
Yeah. And how much empathy can we have once we really take the focus off of our human experience or the human experience? I guess a man in a field of blooming flowers, he's still a man out there in the world, but maybe he is on a different planet and maybe he's dreaming. I don't know. But just a
Yeah.
departure from a reality that we are perhaps more familiar with, I think
Yeah.
is exciting. And it opens up this, opportunity. The doors for vulnerability, I think, are easier opened sometimes when it's just like with plants or just like with the dog program or other animal programs in that space, but other living beings. And you take the point of focus off of yourself, and that can be incredibly freeing.
Yeah. Um, it reminds me of did you ever play with Magic Eye when you were younger?
Yeah, definitely.
Like when you defocus your eyes and then
Mhm.
this other image emerges
Yeah, yeah.
from that. Yeah. I definitely think have my better thoughts when I'm not trying to think about things like
Yeah.
the quiet spaces in between or the shower, or the walk with the dogs or the
Mhm.
which means I'm pretty convinced the brain is just functioning and it does well when we're not sort of directly demanding things from it all the time and give it some space to just like process. And then it will readily give us stuff when we're not pressuring it so much.
For sure. And then your example of the shower, absolutely a space where, you wish you could take like a waterproof notebook in the shower sometimes.
That
Yes.
might break it, right? Because part of it is that you can't, and that you're
Yeah.
almost like your brain knows that. And it's like, hey, you've given
Yep.
me space to not be sort of recorded and
Yeah.
organized. And yeah,
Yeah.
that mental freedom is such a big
Mm.
theme of so much of what you've been speaking of today. I would love to ask you what in the work you're doing now, what do you find the most energizing or meaningful and how that connects to your own personal journey?
I think that a lot of what we get to do in our spaces relies so heavily and gets to flourish because of the sense of team that we get to
Mhm.
have. And there have been plenty other work experiences or life experiences, actual teams that I was a part of that have never felt like this. Think that's because the team we're building is the best kept secret in that space. It is an unspoken agreement largely where we are all getting to shine. All of our differences that make us uniquely beautiful have a space in our shared seed and bloom space on our team, and we need everybody. So it makes a night like we had on Wednesday this past week. We did a Thanksgiving dinner in our kitchen with our level 2 students. So students who will be looking at release generally within anywhere from like 16 months to 3 years of being in our program. Some students will be incarcerated for longer. I'm thinking of one in particular who has an out date of 2039. But largely, that's a class where students will be re entering the free world sooner than later. That said, a lot of those students have not turned on a stove or cracked an egg or looked at grocery store prices in real time for over 10 years. And so when we get into the kitchen, little things, the everyday things that seem, that are the ones that get taken for granted, perhaps on our everyday table. I'm generalizing, but like at our Thanksgiving meal, we we were assigned into smaller teams, and one team took on mashed potatoes from scratch, and one team took on table setting, so making floral bouquets, putting out the tablecloths, putting out the new brightly colored plastic plates with cloth napkins and new silverware. And all of our smaller teams contributed to this larger idea that we were really going to execute on a fantastic meal. And, in that space, there are, as they say, eyes in the sky. So cameras everywhere
Yeah.
looking at us. And so there's a bunch of corrections officers in the control room studying us all, our team, in this petri dish, because it really does look so different and so appalling to quite a few of the COs who I
Yeah.
think, and I'm extending a ton of empathy their way because they also are institutionalized. And and anyway, yeah, it's that sense of team that has really been unlike anything I've experienced elsewhere.
Yeah.
That it's everybody cares so much about the softness of our space, staying soft.
Yeah. And that team exists both in the facilitators that do the work, but the students themselves, right?
Mm.
I've picked up on a number of things you've mentioned about the power that's coming from within through this work that you're doing.
It's part of the team structure too, is that, and it's we have people who have always led by example, and they're older students, and that's going to look a lot different from a student who was incarcerated. One in particular is about to be released. He's been incarcerated since he was 15, and he's 31 now. So all of that, like formative life experience compared to a student who is older, who's
Yeah.
owned a home, who's had a full career, who's raised children, like they're gonna bring those experiences to the team and to the space in different ways. And I think the goal of our time together is that we're engineering opportunities for leadership wherever we can,
Yeah. Yeah.
so
Yeah. This work sounds so empowering and
mm,
important. Um,
mm.
and as you look to the future of the work that you're doing, what what questions or possibilities are most calling to you right now or intriguing you to move forward with?
Yeah, so I think that for the longest time, it was always easier to think like, okay, I'm an abolitionist and I'm doing this work and I love this work. but I want to tear these institutions down. But
Mm,
I love this work. And am I complicit in going into the space to work with students who are incarcerated? Aren't I feeding into the very system that I am wanting to tear down? And I think 8 years later, and thinking ahead to say the next 8 years, if I'm lucky enough to get them, is this work isn't about workforce development. This work isn't about second chances and this like messaging that we have around corrections, which is, we're all bigger, than we're all better than this terrible action or experience that has led us to this point. I think I'm really interested, especially because now we've been given opportunities to engage so deeply with our students reentering the free world. The students have to contact us, and they have been. And so what's
mm,
emerging is this reentry arm where I've gone shopping with our students who've reentered using
mm,
our grocery class list from the classroom and meal
mhm,
planning like we do in our culinary workshops. But
mm,
it's an extension of the work or the seeds being planted inside and how that gets to develop or bloom on the outside, still working together, still
mm,
treating each other with that same spirit we have on the team we've created inside.
mm,
So watching students, that common statistic that people pay attention to oftentimes is, will someone recidivate? So will they return to prison within a year? And so many, I think to the tune of 67% of those incarcerated in New Mexico will. And so where along the journey are we staying soft enough to watch a student hit a milestone like getting their own apartment, but reminding them that they love to crochet and that
yeah.
they are excited about classes because they were excited about their college classes on the inside and they were excited about crocheting on the inside. And so the set of skills that's emerging is it takes work for all of us to balance professional goals and commitments with time for ourselves.
Yeah.
Like one of the things I love to do is play tennis. We have to like organize that. You have to find someone to play with. You have to remember to pack your racket. You have to remember that, you can play from 4 to 5 on Thursdays, but then you got to build in time to cook dinner. And so these skills that are emerging in reentry is really interesting to me, maintaining that
Mm,
relationship beyond those doors and beyond our time program,
mhm,
because the institution won't be torn down in my lifetime and for a long time still. So this is of great interest, I think.
mm. That is very powerful, and
Uh,
I suspect there's a lot of room there for you to do some
yeah.
work.
Yeah.
If we project ourselves 5 years into the future, what you've already stated you don't think you're gonna see abolition in your lifetime, but 5 years from now, what do you hope has moved forward in the right direction?
Well, in our smaller world for the work, I hope that means we've stayed in touch with the students who've reached out to us, that we have continued our work on the inside, and that we've changed some minds on the side of corrections, that we are more collaborative
Mm,
in that shared relationship of, you know, operating in what we're calling a rehabilitative space and walking that talk like together more.
mm, mhm,
And, you know, I do think what distinguishes our work from other programming on the inside is that, like, we're not, when a student enters Seed and Bloom, they're not part of a cohort that will graduate and then move on within 8 weeks or 12 weeks. Some of the other programming operates that way and offers students what's called a lump sum amount, an LSA, which means time off of their sentence. So if
okay,
you're
yeah,
in an 8-week program for HVAC, you'll get a month off your sentence. I mean, this is an example. I don't know the specifics, but it often
yeah,
functions like that. students really, when they join Seed and Bloom, that's how we've been able to cultivate a relationship, over time, serving time with students for as long as we get to,
Yeah.
because it's that consistency and that care and that like softness week after week after week, which is very tough to measure, which just says these are recreational solutions when you re-enter. They're recreational. Is a home garden going to be the answer to all of your like needs of your family table? No. Is it going to, feed the whole block, of your local community? No, but it is, isn't it cool to always be growing cilantro or parsley and to have that in your kitchen? Isn't it cool to nourish yourself and
Yeah.
know how you can stretch an exercise we play with a lot, like taking this grocery list and you've got $20. How many
Yeah.
people can you feed and how many of these items could you put on that list? How many meals could you make? And so then it's an exercise about staying creative and self-sufficient
Yeah.
and joyful, really in the spirit of joy.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, that's the goal.
I love that. And I know the sense of like confidence I
Mm.
feel keeping my basil going. I figured out recently how to cut them properly so I could then put them in some water on the windowsill and make more. So I haven't bought
Mm.
basil plant in a couple years, and the pride I feel really adds to my mental health. And I think very profound ways, and all I'm doing is basil, like it's to your point, I'm not
Delicious.
completely replacing my need for grocery store at all here, but yeah, it's deeply empowering and then practical, right? Like, see
Yeah, totally. Yes. Yes.
that it's a skill, and someone on YouTube taught me that skill. Thank you. Last question here is
Yeah.
imagining that there's an individual who's thinking about working in correctional spaces who might be interested in therapeutic horticulture or culinary or what do you call that animal therapy, I guess, with the
Mm.
dogs.
Oh, canine, the canine
Canine.
program.
Oh, that would
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
but just anyone, let's say, who's sort of interested in this work and they might be questioning, is this for me or wanting to learn more? What message would you share about this work to someone who might be interested in it?
I think it is perhaps as simple as start. And I say that to me,
Yeah.
volunteer, you know, contact the volunteer coordinator at your local correctional facility and ask if you can come in and join one of the existing programs or what are those existing programs. And if they call out to you, join one. And if not, know that how Seed and Bloom started was by showing up with a small box of seeds and asking for a growing space in the courtyard and start small. Ask if you can come in for an hour twice a month and see if you like it. See
Hmm.
if the space is a space where you feel comfortable and you feel like there's purpose and you feel like you're there for reasons that go beyond. It's such a place of mystery to a lot of us. And it can become very quickly, I think, a space that's almost like fetishized or it's like our mutual
Mythologize.
friend. Yeah, or our mutual friend Leah has described it as like it's a sexy project to some, where the language around, oh, working in a prison, is so much of our like experience or our relationship to prison spaces is through pop culture. So like Orange is the New Black, or like I had a new volunteer come in and say like, "Oh, this is so much nicer than I thought." And so just to continue to go in is what I'd say to someone at all curious and you stare at this space over and over for a period of, say, 3 or 6 months, like it is about that consistency. Like, what do you notice about the space, and what do you notice about yourself in the space? And then what do you notice about yourself as you emerge and you re-enter? Every single time you cross those gates, you re-enter the free world and you can go do whatever you want. Like as simply as, will I turn right or will I turn left out of these gates? Just getting to decide. I'd say that as many ways as you can bring in that feeling and offer that choice, that's therapy. That's the freedom. Is, the most important thing we do is just like consistently show up and offer choices
Yeah.
in a place that really is designed to keep those very things out. So see if you like that exercise.
Well, beautiful. Thank you so much for chatting with me today. And thank you to the listeners for joining us on this episode. And I hope our conversation with Gunjan has offered valuable insights about therapeutic horticulture or the punishment systems we have in this country. Before I let you go, Gunjan, is there an organization besides Seed and Bloom, which we'll certainly have in our show notes and links there, but is there any organization or group that you'd like to give a shout out to?
Hmm. I think that the Horticultural Society of New York is definitely an awesome organization to check out. They've been doing this work for a long time in carceral spaces and have been doing it really beautifully and responsibly. So I would encourage anyone to check them out. Most definitely. Yeah.
Okay. If you've enjoyed today's discussion, I invite you to share this episode and subscribe to Able Pathways podcast on your favorite platform. Your support helps us to share these meaningful conversations with more people. Visit ablepathways.com or check out the detailed show notes for links to resources and organizations mentioned in today's episode. Have thoughts about this episode or suggestions for future guests? We would love to hear from you. Leave us a comment or email us at hello@ablepathways.com. Until next time, I'm Annabelle, reminding you that there are infinite pathways to growth. May you travel yours with curiosity and courage.